Okay, I think we're ready to go. Hello, everyone. I'm Marie Story, Account Executive in the Employee Benefits Department. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, which is Understanding Key Leave Laws in New York, COVID and Beyond. It's presented by Jane Kunkel and Laura Lamonto from HR Works, Inc. This webinar is part of Walsh Duffield's Summer School series, where we will be hosting a different subject matter expert each week in June to discuss key issues in HR and in employee benefits. If you haven't checked out the rest of our lineup, be sure to visit walshduffield.com/summer school for a description of each presentation and for the links to register. Before I introduce Jane and Laura, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded. We'll share a link with you after the event, along with the presentation slides. The presentation is approved for 1 SHRM Professional Development credit and 1 Business Recertification credit hour through HRCI. We will email the code needed for these credits to live attendees only after the webinar is over. We certainly invite your comments and questions. Please use the Q&A box on your screen. You'll see that at the bottom. If you think of a question at any point, just type it in there and we'll hold it for the discussion portion at the end of the event. And with that, I'm happy to introduce today's presenters. First, we have Jane Kunkel. She's an HR associate with HR Works, Inc. She works closely with our HR strategic partners to help clients reach their strategic human resources goals. She also supports the HR Works virtual helpline, online learning management system, or LMS, and facilitates live trainings for our valued clients. Laura Lamonto is a leave administrator at HR Works. She has 10 years of leave administration experience involving leaves under FMLA, New York paid family leave, New Jersey leaves, company-specific LOAs, and ADAAA, as well as a former human resources leave trainer experience. That is an impressive resume. Today, Jane and Laura will be discussing the current landscape of New York leave laws. We know this is such a hot topic for our clients out there today, and include when absences related to COVID-19 may be applicable to New York sick leave, COVID-19 paid sick leave, New York PFL, and New York paid vaccination leave. So there is a lot to cover today, and we know this is so important to you all. At this time, I'm going to hand the floor over to Jane, who will get us started on today's presentation. Thanks, Jane.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Marie. Thank you for that great introduction. And the HR Works team is just so grateful to be here today. So as Marie mentioned, today we'll be examining 4 of New York's leave laws and how those laws may be applicable to COVID-19. By the end of this session, you will have a stronger understanding of key New York leave laws and be able to determine which leave laws may apply to an employee's COVID-related situation. Okay, so again, today's goal, understanding these leave laws in New York State when it may be covered under previous and recently passed state leave legislation. So for an agenda today, this training will provide a brief high-level overview of New York paid sick leave, New York COVID-19 paid sick leave, and a coordination with enhanced PFL and DVL benefits, New York paid family leave, and New York paid vaccination leave. We will explore how or if these leaves interact with one another and discuss some do's and don'ts of administering these leaves. Before the end of the session, my colleague Laura will go through some interactive scenarios. We'll be testing our understanding today. And as Marie mentioned, a copy of the slide deck will be shared with all attendees. And again, please put your questions in the chat or in the Q&A feature, and we'll be sure to address them at the end of the session. So with that, we will dive right in. We'll begin our discussion today with New York paid sick leave. Sometimes it helps me personally to call this classic New York State paid sick leave because this law was long in the works before COVID was even a twinkle in our eyes. So you might hear me call this classic New York State paid sick leave during this presentation, and that's just to help distinguish it from other COVID-related leaves. You should know that this is just a nickname for the leave, and it's not the formal name for the leave. So classic New York State paid sick leave requires employers with 5 or more employees or a net income of more than 1 million to provide paid sick leave to employees, and for employers with fewer than 5 employees and a net income of 1 million or less to provide unpaid sick leave to employees. So on September 30th of 2020, covered employees in New York State began to accrue leave at a rate of 1 hour for every 30 hours worked. And then on January 1st of 2021, employees were able to start using accrued leave. The law covers all private sector employees in New York State, regardless of industry, occupation, part-time status, and overtime exempt status. Federal, state, and local government employees are not covered, but employees of charter schools, private schools, and not-for-profit corporations are covered. The amount of sick leave employees receive depends on employer size. So employers with 100 or more employees must provide up to 56 hours of paid sick leave per calendar year. Employers with 5 to 99 employees must provide up to 40 hours of paid sick leave per calendar year. Employers with 4 or fewer employees and a net income of greater than 1 million in the previous tax year are required to provide up to 40 hours of paid sick leave per calendar year. And finally, employers with 4 or fewer employees and a net income of 1 million or less in the previous tax year are required to provide up to 40 hours of unpaid sick leave per calendar year. The leave can also be front-loaded as an alternative to the accrual method. When we talk about calendar year, when we're counting employees and determining which category we fall in, the law requires us to use a January 1st through December 31st calendar year. But for other purposes, including the use and accrual of leave, employers can set a calendar year to mean any 12-month period, such as the company's fiscal year, the employee's anniversary date, etc. The law also requires carryover. So carryover of unused leave must be from 1 year to the next. That's required. But unused paid sick leave can be paid out at the end of the year if the employee and the employer agreed to do so. Notably, employers can also limit the amount of leave taken in any year, regardless of what was carried over. They can limit the leave to the maximum amount required to be provided under the law. So for example, 40 or 56 hours. As far as documentation, there is no specified advance notice requirement or documentation that employees need to provide prior to using leave, and an employee may make an oral or written request to use it. An employer is not allowed to require medical or other verification in connection with sick leave that lasts less than 3 consecutive previously scheduled workdays or shift. As far as the pay during the leave, employees must be paid their normal rate of pay for any paid leave time under this law or the applicable minimum wage rate, whichever is greater. We'll now take a look at some reasons for PSL. Under New York sick leave law, employers that are covered are required to provide sick and safe leave to eligible employees. Under the law, PSL may be used for an employee's own covered absence or that of a covered family member. Under the law, family member is defined as an employee's child, spouse, domestic partner, parent, sibling, grandchild, or grandparent, and the child or parent of an employee's spouse or domestic partner. PSL may be used for a very broad range of reasons, including for appointments that require treatment for a condition or for preventative medical care. Use of the leave for safe purposes is not dependent on having reporting a victim-related crime to law enforcement or having obtained a criminal conviction related to the matter. So I won't read this whole slide to you, but you can see that the reasons for paid sick and safe leave are very broad. And generally speaking, there's not a real reason an employer would need to be asking about why an employee is utilizing the leave unless there's a reasonable concern that it is being used inappropriately. As far as concurrence with other leaves, which we'll talk about later when Laura takes over, PSL may be used in conjunction with other state mandated leaves, such as crime victim leave, domestic violence victim leave, or notably today to supplement PFL and/or FMLA. So that's classic New York State paid sick leave. Next, I will move on to discuss New York COVID-19 paid sick leave. On March 18th, 2020, legislation was passed which provides paid leave due to COVID-19, and this legislation expanded the state's PFL and disability benefits to provide access to leave to employees who are under a mandatory or precautionary order of quarantine or isolation issued by the state of New York, the Department of Health, the local Board of Health, or any governmental entity duly authorized to issue such an order due to COVID-19. So similar to classic PSL, an employer's obligation to pay for COVID paid sick leave is going to be based on the employer's size and revenue. The number of paid days an employee receives while on this leave is based on the amount of time that an employee would regularly work during a 5 or 14-day period in conjunction with the number of days the order stipulates that the employee is required to isolate or quarantine. So for example, 5 or 10 days. Notably, New York State COVID-19 paid sick leave does not have an expiration date. So let's take a look at this side-by-side chart. These are paid leave requirements and enhanced PFL DBL benefits, and it helps us to understand the coordination between an employer's obligation to pay for the leave versus an insurance carrier's obligation. So enhanced PFL DBL allows employees of small and medium employers to continue to be paid for the duration of their isolation or quarantine period via PFL DBL insurance. In other words, the state decided to allow an employee's own governmental order of quarantine or isolation to be a new and expanded reason that employees are now able to access these state funds. This is compared to the traditional reasons for these benefits, such as an employee needs to care for a family member or an employee's own disabilities. So walking through this chart, employees of small employers, all the paid time during the period of isolation or quarantine is paid through the employer's PFL or DBL carrier. For medium employers, the first 5 days of the isolation or quarantine period is going to be fully paid for by the employer, after which, if the isolation period continues, employees can receive additional paid time for the duration of the period of isolation or quarantine through the employer's PFL or DBL carrier. For large and public employers, the period of isolation or quarantine is going to be paid entirely by the employer, up to a maximum of 14 days. There will be no PFL or DBL benefits paid by the carrier. As far as the amount of benefits, the enhanced benefits allow eligible employees to use PFL to receive 67% of their pay, up to a maximum weekly benefit of $840.70. After receiving their full PFL benefit, they can receive disability benefits to match their full wages, up to a maximum weekly disability benefit of $2,043.92. So this is a combined total of $2,884.62 per week. There is going to be no waiting period for either of these benefits, but the use of enhanced PFL DBL benefits does draw down an employee's PFL DBL time. COVID-19 paid sick leave can only be used for an employee's own order of isolation or quarantine. Employees who need time off to care for a family member who is under an order of isolation or quarantine may be eligible for PFL and/or may use classic New York paid sick leave benefits. Employees may be eligible to use New York COVID-19 paid sick leave up to 3 times, according to state guidance. However, the second and third occurrence are based on the employee being deemed positive for COVID-19. If an employee tests positive for COVID-19 following a period of mandatory quarantine, the employee, 1, cannot report to work, 2, is automatically deemed subject to a subsequent mandatory order of isolation from the New York Department of Health, and 3, is entitled to paid sick leave under the New York COVID-19 sick leave law, even if the employee already received New York COVID-19 sick leave for the first period of mandatory quarantine. Again, to receive the COVID-19 sick leave for the subsequent time, the employee is required to submit documentation of a positive COVID-19 test from a licensed medical provider. Additionally, under state guidance, employees may be eligible for New York COVID-19 paid sick leave if an employer excludes an employee from the workplace due to exposure to COVID-19. The current state guidance does require employers to provide employees with paid leave if the employer mandates that the employee should not report to work due to potential exposure to COVID-19. If this happens, the state guidance says that the employee must be paid at their regular rate of pay until the employer allows the employee to return to work, or if the employee becomes subject to an order of quarantine. If they do get that order of quarantine, then the employee would receive New York COVID-19 sick leave for the duration of that order. So that's New York COVID-19 paid sick leave. And with that, the next leave we're going to review briefly today is our old friend, New York paid family leave. And this was signed into law all the way back in 2016. Recall that New York PFL provides eligible employees with up to 12 weeks of job protected paid time off to bond with a new child, care for a family member with a serious health condition, or to assist loved ones when a family member is deployed abroad on active military service. The time for PFL can be taken all at once or in increments in full days. Leave that is not covered under New York COVID-19 paid sick leave may be covered under PFL. To use PFL for COVID-19 related reasons, the employee does need to meet the PFL time worked requirements, which, as you can see on this slide, for full-time employees, those that regularly work 20 or more hours per week, they need to work 26 consecutive weeks of employment. And for part-time employees, those that regularly work fewer than 20 hours a week after 175 working days. So again, we're talking about traditional PFL. Employees taking paid family leave receive 67% of their average weekly wage. This is up to a cap of 67% of the current statewide average weekly wage. So for 2022, the statewide average weekly wage is $15.94.57, which means 67% of that, the maximum weekly benefit is $1,068.36. So again, how does this interact with COVID-19? As part of the state's effort to provide paid time off benefits due to COVID-19, employees can use PFL if their minor dependent child is under a mandatory or precautionary order of quarantine or isolation, or to care for an eligible family member who contracts COVID-19. As a reminder, the job protection under PFL includes returning to the same or comparable job. It includes continued health insurance, and it includes non-discrimination and non-retaliation towards the employee utilizing the leave. The final leave that we'll go over today is New York paid vaccination leave. On March 12th, 2021, legislation was passed granting employees of private employers paid leave time to receive their own COVID-19 vaccination. The paid vaccination leave cannot be used to take a family member to be vaccinated. The maximum number of hours that employee is entitled to paid leave under this law is going to depend on the number of required COVID-19 vaccine injections. If a COVID-19 vaccine requires 2 injections, then the employee would be entitled to 2 periods of paid leave up to 4 hours each. So that could be up to 8 hours total for that particular vaccine. Booster shots are in fact covered under New York paid vaccination leave. Notably, the law is set to expire this year on December 31st, 2022. The law does not prevent an employer from requiring notice for the vaccine leave, and it also does not prevent an employer from requiring proof of vaccination. However, employers are encouraged to consider any confidentiality requirements applicable to such records prior to requesting proof of vaccination. So with that, I will turn it over to my colleague Laura, and she's now going to walk us through some rules of the road to help us all navigate these New York leave laws. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jane. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. As Jane was saying, we're really guiding you through a high-level overview with some good details we think that you're probably encountering now and have some questions on regarding New York state leave, sick leaves, that classic, and the encompassing details that COVID-19 has brought us. So with a little bit more of a structure of rules of the road and driving and navigating with you, we're going to continue to explain. And then as part of the second portion, there are going to be some interactive questions and scenarios to help you put the material that we've covered on the paper, on the road, and apply it. So go ahead, Jane. Okay, so for rules of the road, the first rule, do determine if an employee's absence for their own situation is being requested or if it's for someone else's. So this is a big one because there are some leaves that we've covered that apply just to the employee and their health versus a covered family member. So certain leaves, such as New York COVID-19 paid sick leave and New York paid vaccination leave, only cover the employee's own absence. So that's really important. Probably might have some questions being fielded if it's for a child or a family member. Those particular ones are for the employee's own. If an absence is for a family member, employers may need to consider other leaves that would be available. Knowing which leaves apply is definitely important. As we discuss and go further, we're definitely going to be explaining the do's and the don'ts of implementing and coordinating these leaves that apply. Next. Okay, so our second rule, don't charge PSL against time that qualifies as New York COVID-19 paid sick leave or the New York paid vaccination leave. An employee's PSL cannot be charged for absences which are going to be covered under New York COVID-19 paid sick leave or the New York paid vaccination leave. However, PSL may be charged for other COVID-19 related absences that are not covered under those particular leaves. So employers really need to determine if an employee's absence here is for their own COVID-19 related situation or that of a covered family member, as COVID-19 paid sick leave and paid vaccination leave are again only applicable to the employee's absence. Leave needed to care for a covered family member may be covered under something such as the classic New York PSL, the PFL, FMLA, or perhaps company provided time off as well. Next. Okay, so rule of the road number 3, don't charge COVID-19 paid sick leave against other leaves. Again, New York COVID-19 paid sick leave must be provided in addition to any other state mandated leave or company provided leave. So keep in mind that employers cannot use the employee's classic PSL for an absence that qualifies as paid time off under New York COVID-19 paid sick leave or the New York paid vaccination leave. The classic PSL may be used in other COVID-19 related situations, such as to recover from any side effects associated with having received the COVID-19 vaccination or booster, to care for a covered family member with COVID-19, or where an employee has exhausted or is otherwise not eligible for COVID-19 paid sick leave or the paid vaccination leave. Next. Rule number 4 of the road: don't charge New York paid vaccination leave against other leaves. So again, New York paid vaccination leave is in addition to any other state mandated or company provided leaves. So New York COVID-19 paid sick is a separate bank of leave that must be provided in addition to any other leave required under state or any paid time off provided by the employer. This means time provided under this leave cannot be charged against New York PSL, vacation, PTO, personal days, etc. If an employee has exhausted or is not eligible for the COVID-19 paid sick leave, then at that point, the employer may consider classic leave options like we mentioned. So the New York PSL, PTO, and apply those accordingly. Next. Fifth rule of the road for these leaves: we do apply classic leave options when applicable. So when state mandated leave does not apply or is exhausted, for example, follow your process for determining if classic leave options such as FMLA, PFL, or company provided time off benefits such as vacation and PTO would apply here. So New York paid vaccination leave is also a separate bank, and it must be provided in addition to other leaves required for any paid time off by the employer. Employees whose absences qualify for time off under this leave cannot have time charged against the classic New York PSL, vacation, PTO, sick days, etc. Time off to accompany a family member to receive a vaccine or a booster, or to recover from a vaccine is not covered under this leave, as it is applicable only to the employee's own vaccination. However, other leaves again may apply to covered family members, such as classic PSL, PTO, etc. Next. Thank you. Okay, so we are going to test our learning. The next thing that we want to go through, hopefully a little bit more interactive presentation, are going to be 5 different scenarios, different types of leave scenarios based on what Jane and I have already covered to help you all apply this knowledge and really put it to real life examples that you can use moving forward, both for yourselves as HR professionals as well in the workplace. Okay. Next. All right. So scenario 1, just move that there. Actually, for our Wash Duffield team, is it possible to move this poll pop-up or to not have it apply yet to minimize it? Thank you. All right, I want to give you guys this scenario first. So our very first scenario, company ABC has 100 or more employees and received a New York Department of Health order of quarantine for one of their employees. Which leaves would be applied to this employee's absence? Okay, so we're actually going to set this up. There's actually a poll, so that at this point, we're going to ask that you guys go ahead and select your most applicable answer or the best choice that you think fits this scenario. We'll go ahead and give that just a little bit. Okay, it looks like the results are in. Okay, so the highest percentage of you picked New York COVID-19 paid sick leave. Looks like we got a couple in the running there. It's actually answer B, which is the New York COVID-19 sick pay, so paid sick leave. Great job, everybody. You've been listening. This is, again, because the employer has 100 or more employees. So like Jane said, they must pay for the entirety of the employee's quarantine period in that case. Employees of a large employer are not eligible for the enhanced PFL and DBL benefits. New York paid sick leave would not apply because an employer cannot charge the COVID-19 paid leave against any other leave, and PFL does not cover an employer's own illness. So great job on that. All right, let's go into our second scenario. Perfect. Okay, so scenario 2, company DMV has an employee who has used New York COVID-19 paid sick leave last month due to exposure to a confirmed positive individual. The employee has been exposed again. Can they use the New York COVID-19 sick leave again? So please choose the best answer. A, yes. B, no. C, it depends. What do you think? Great job. Oh my gosh, you guys are blowing me away right now. So it looks like 51% of you, the majority that answered, did choose C, it depends. Let's kind of go over why that is, especially for those of you who chose yes or no. This is a little tricky. So it does depend. It is the best answer because generally we know an employee would not be eligible to use COVID-19 paid sick leave a second or that third time due to just exposure, unless the employer has a policy that would exclude this employee from being in the actual workplace after having been exposed to a confirmed positive individual. Otherwise, in order to qualify for a second or third occurrence of this leave, the employees would need to not just have been exposed to COVID-19, they have to be able to provide a positive test themselves of COVID-19. So that's why. Great job. Okay, so third scenario, you guys are just zipping right through these. Company XYZ has 50 employees and received a New York Department order of isolation for their employee's minor child. Which of these leaves may be applied for this employee's absence? A, New York paid family leave and or the New York paid sick leave. B, New York paid family leave only. C, New York paid sick leave only. Or D, New York COVID-19 leave and New York paid family leave. I'll give you just a minute for that one. All right, how'd we do here? Oh my God, you guys, good job. Okay, so the majority, 48% of you did choose A, which is the New York paid family leave and or the New York paid sick leave. Correct. So let's go over why that answer is the correct choice. Either classic PFL or PSL could apply to this leave. For PFL to apply, the employee would need to meet all the PFL eligibility requirements. They have to be eligible for PFL. And if not, the employee may use the PSL to cover their absence. PSL could also be used to supplement the employee's PFL benefits during the leave. Great job. All right, so hopping into scenario 4, Company DMV has 75 employees. An employee has mentioned to their manager that their mother is experiencing long COVID symptoms and will need their assistance to care for themselves. Which leave may apply to this employee's absence? A, New York PFL, B, FMLA, New York PFL, and New York paid sick leave, C, New York paid family leave or New York paid sick leave, or D, New York COVID-19 leave and New York paid family leave. Give you a minute for that one. Okay, how'd we do? You guys are amazing. You got it right again. You're 4 for 4. The correct answer is B, which 70% of you chose. Great job. So that would be the FMLA, New York PFL, and the New York paid sick leave. Just to recap on why B is the best answer, when we're talking about long COVID may be considered a serious health condition. So that might be covered under FMLA and PFL for this family member. In addition, an employer may permit an employee to supplement their PFL benefit with that New York PSL. Okay, and then I've got one more scenario for you guys. Okay, scenario 5. The Yellow Line company has an employee who has requested time off to accompany their grandmother to her weekly dialysis appointments. Which leaves may apply to this employee's absence? So A is New York PFL, B is New York COVID-19 leave, C is New York paid family leave and New York paid sick leave, and D would be FMLA, New York paid family leave, and New York paid sick leave. What do you guys think? Give you a minute for that one as well. Okay, this one's tricky. I can't wait to see these answers. Oh, I think we stumped you guys finally. You guys are so smart. This one, it's really tricky. It's actually answer C. So let's kind of go over this. We see that it's for a grandmother, it's for her weekly dialysis appointments. The reason that it's C, which is New York paid family leave and New York paid sick leave. It's the best answer as we know COVID-19 paid sick leave would not apply to this absence. And for this, FMLA generally doesn't cover grandparents unless they're a covered family member under something called in loco parentis to that employee when they were a minor. So usually grandparents aren't covered under FMLA unless it's that scenario. So that leaves us with C being the best answer because New York PFL can be taken to care for grandparents, and employers may also permit employees to use PSL to supplement their PFL benefits. So that was a really tricky one, but you guys did great. Great job with all 5 scenarios. I hope that that helps you all put some of the material that we went through into perspective, into those real life scenarios. And then we just want to go through a couple things for you in the next slide. Real quick, we have also just included some various links and resources for your use. So this is an available resource that will be provided to you along with this presentation. Next. So if for some reason leave administration services are needed, here at HR Works, we do offer our clients those full leave administration services. They're more tailored, up to date, and effective for all of these leave nuances. So that's something that we offer. Next. We're definitely also really proud to offer our HR strategic services for any compliance and or HR supportive services for our clients as well. So next. All right, so I just want to say again, thank you so much for having us here. If you do have any questions on our HR services, feel free to reach out to us for more information, but this is an available resource that, again, will be provided to you. And on behalf of Jane, T, the entire HR Works team, and myself, we'd really like to thank you guys for having us here, taking the time out of your day to go through some of these crazy leave scenarios and these newer leaves as they apply. We really hope it helped you. And we do have T. Nelson standing by to answer some of your questions. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, HR Works team. You've been great presenting this complicated information. If you haven't submitted a question that you might have, please do so in the Q&A box. We'll get to as many as time allows. There are quite a few. This is a very hot topic, a confusing topic, and we're very happy to have T. Nelson on today, who is a senior compliance analyst at HR Works. So I'm going to pull up the questions, T. And talk through what we can in the time that we have. And as you'll see, some questions were already even answered, so you might have gotten a response already if T saw it. So the first one is, can employers cap the amount of sick time carried over each year when it is included in the PTO? So for example, the employer side must provide 56 hours of sick time. Employer includes sick with PTO and offers 10 plus days a year. The employer currently limits the amount of time that can be provided over to 80 hours a year. Is this in compliance with the carryover requirement?
Okay, so this one's a little bit more of a complicated answer in that I'm going to preface this with the fact that the New York Department of Labor in its regulations and any interpretive guidance or FAQs that they issued haven't really given us good information about PTO policies other than that they must meet or exceed the minimum requirements under the law. So, and as it relates to carryover, another interesting fact is that this was asked and answered by like a number of employers, and the state came back saying that they hadn't contemplated a limit to the carryover amount because for some reason they felt that it wasn't within their rulemaking authority to do so. So that was an interesting response. That being said, I think there's a couple of ways that you can approach this. So ultra conservative way to go about it would obviously be to allow employees to carry over any time that they have available. And I understand that that may not be reasonable for some employers. So into this question specifically, if they can carry over 80 hours, that definitely will exceed the minimum requirements of the law because it's either going to be 40 or 56 hours that they're entitled to based on your size and your revenue. So the other thing that we would typically recommend for employers that want to use their PTO policy to comply. So one way to kind of shore this up and make it a little bit more clear is to create some sort of carve out language in your PTO policy that one acknowledges the fact that you are using paid time off to also comply with the state's paid sick leave law, and that employees can use up to 56 or 40 hours of their PTO for that purpose, because then that kind of allows you to more comfortably slide into, okay, if we want to limit carryover, we're going to limit it based on either the 40 or the 56 hours. If you do more than that, that's great. That's going to be above and beyond what the minimum requirement of the law is. So I think you would be safe to do that. So that being said, because they haven't provided great guidance for PTO policies, we have to follow that up with, you may also wish to run that by your legal counsel. So that was a really good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And we have another one that's a little bit of a scenario. For the paid sick leave law, we hire interns, paid interns, for a 90-day period each summer. What is our requirement to offer them paid sick time and how much if required?
So for interns are going to be covered if they're, paid interns. So basically this law is going to cover all types of employees. So as Jane mentioned, you got full-time, part-time, seasonal, temps, paid interns. So what would happen with your interns is that they would need to be receiving or accruing at least 1 hour for every 30 hours worked for the period that they're in your employment. So you can do a front load calculation of what that actual amount would turn out to be based on the hours that they're going to work, or you can use that true accrual method for them so that you don't inadvertently provide them with more time than they would actually earn over the 90-day period.
Okay. And then when determining your employee count for COVID sick leave and New York State paid sick leave, what period do you use? This
Okay.
for a very seasonal business.
Okay, good question. So those are two different leaves. So they have two different periods for determination. So for the COVID-19 paid sick leave, that is going to be whatever your size was as of January 1st of 2020. So that's kind of how that one works. So you kind of have to do a look back at this point to say, okay, how many employees did we have in our employ on that particular date and time for the COVID-19 paid sick leave? For the regular paid sick leave, as Jane mentioned in her presentation, for that one, you're going to be looking at the highest number of employees that you had within a calendar year to determine which requirement you're going to be held to, whether that's the 40 hours, the 56 hours of providing paid sick leave. So that's going to be calendar year specific.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
If an employee is eligible for New York paid family leave and FMLA, is the employee required to take both at the same time?
So required is a strong word, but I would say it's a best practice. So if you have employees whose leave qualifies for both FMLA and PFL, it is a best practice to run those leaves concurrently so that they're not able to stack leave. So if you fail to do that, what could happen is that you could have employees go out for up to 12 work weeks on FMLA and then turn around and go out for up to another 12 work weeks on PFL. So whenever the leave qualifies under both, best practice is to ensure that you're running those leaves concurrent.
Okay. And then if the employee is eligible for up to 40 hours, so I'm thinking based on the size of the employer, but they do not work to accrue that amount, do they only have access to what they've accrued, that 1 hour per 30 hours worked?
So I'm assuming that this is going to be related to the classic paid sick leave. So for that, yes, they're going to, so if you're using the accrual method, it is purely based on actual hours work. So the 1 hour for every 30 is going to be based on what they actually work, if that answers the question.
Okay, yeah, I think that's helpful.
Okay.
And then I think we're on our last one here. What are the requirements to leave for when someone's using an at-home COVID test? Can you require that they have a PCR test only, or if you want to at-home tests, are the leaves still okay as stated?
So because the state has shifted positions several times on what constitutes a quarantine order or an isolation order, so from an overall workplace safety standpoint, I would say best practice would be to allow at-home tests as well to kind of be used to determine if someone tests positive for COVID-19. Now, there's no law that says an employer has to allow at-home tests or a PCR test for that matter. So that might come down to a matter of company policy. That being said, what I can say is depending upon where you are located in New York, and I think most of the counties now are following the state guidance where you can take an at-home test. And if it turns up positive, you can report that to your county. And then you would go online and fill out your attestation of either isolation for having tested positive for COVID-19. And that attestation is going to be acceptable now as allowing that person to have the leave that they're entitled to. So it's not really a situation anymore where a lot of the local health departments are actually providing orders of quarantine.
That makes sense. I think that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for answering that one. And
You're
thank
welcome.
you for all the answers. I know that this is such a complicated topic, so we really want to thank everyone who joined us today for this webinar, especially Jane, Laura, and T. Thank you for sharing your insight and expertise. We really hoped that everyone today enjoyed the presentation. As you know, this is part of our summer series, so next week, we are looking forward to hosting Frank Kerman from the Business Council of New York State. He'll discuss recent legislative updates that we should all be aware of. And to register for next week's webinar, if you haven't already, and to view the rest of our lineup, visit walshduffield.com/summer school. And if you have any additional questions or you'd like to connect directly with the team, feel free to reach out directly using the contact information that was just provided in the chat box. We're available at Walsh Duffield to help with any of your employee benefits, well-being, or insurance needs. And thank you again to the HR Works team and to all of you for joining us today. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks
so much,
so
everyone.
Thank you. Bye.